Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia, back with the latest episode of the Jungle World podcast powered by CLNS Media and our good friends at the Game Time app. Well, it is my sincere pleasure to catch up now with one of the best people on the Bengals beat. That goes without saying. Geoff Butch Hobson of Bengals.com. He has been covering the Bengals since when, Butch? 1990.
1990. Boom.
1990. Boom.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So last year was your 25th year on the beat, right?
The 25th. No, well, it was the 25th season of Bengals.com at Bengals.com. Yes, sir.
That's right. So that would have been your 35th year on the beat.
Right. Off and on, because
and
it was
on.
a stretch there. For 10 years, I covered the Reds one season. It was the worst year of my life.
So this would be your 35th year in total covering the Cincinnati Bengals in some shape or form.
Exactly. Yep.
I would dare say, Geoff, that this is going to be maybe one of the most important, significant off seasons in recent Bengal history, and one of the most important in their franchise's long and storied past.
Yeah, I think that's right, Trags. They got to figure out a way, to take advantage of the quarterback, right? They've got, one of the preeminent quarterbacks of his generation. So they have to find a way to help him, succeed and get wins, and whether that's fixing the defense, whether it's the financial puzzle of trying to, get his receivers wrapped up, a change in coaching staff on defense. That it might be as simple as that. Not as simple, but if you could get them to be the 18th defense,
right? They would have made the playoffs. Butch.
That's the answer, right? I guess that's the answer. I mean, is it? When you watch the playoffs and you watch Derrick Henry take the ball 6 straight times and run for a touchdown, and then they throw it for a 2-point conversion, you say, keep it simple. So how about keep it simple? Get your defense to 18. To me, that ought to be the focus of the.
All right. That sounds like a good jumping off point here, Geoff, in terms of what I want to address, and that is the vacancy that still remains on Zach Taylor's coaching staff. The defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, is off to the Indianapolis Colts. He got his gig. He's going to be happy right up by 74. The Bengals need to decide. It appears, depending on which reports you read, James Rapine of SI.com certainly has a credible story out there. He is a credible reporter on the beat, no question about it. He has a story out there that the Bengals are down to 2. Patrick Graham, he was last with the Las Vegas Raiders, defensive coordinator out there since 2022. Josh McDaniels brought him in his familiarity with him from his days in New England. And then there's Al Golden. Speaking of guys that were trying to stop a running game in Monday night's national championship game, Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, who, of course, has ties to the Cincinnati Bengals. It wasn't too long ago, Butch, that Al Golden was the linebackers coach with the Cincinnati Bengals. I guess, first of all, let's take the more familiar face with Zach Taylor. What do you like about Al Golden and what he could bring back to Cincinnati as a defensive coordinator?
Well, the guy's just so experienced. I mean, he is. He's done it all. He's done it all everywhere, and he's had success for the most part. I mean, last night, maybe an exception, but I still think he still put for them to get as far as they did in the NIL era. Obviously, a lot of brain power there. Great job by the head coach and everybody involved in that coaching staff. So, that's just the latest of what, what Al's done in his storied career. In Cincinnati, he did a great job with Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. He was a big factor in getting them to these big second contracts. And, they had he was gone when they made their biggest impact, but he clearly got them ready for the big time. So, you're probably looking for a guy to revive Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. That'd be probably a good place to start, maybe. If that's if that's where you're looking to start there. I mean, plus in that, Al knows Zach, and anybody who knows Al, very detailed guy, very a painstaking guy approach to the game, leaves no stone unturned. Always been a plus everywhere he's been. So, and he's familiar with the building. People know him. But then the flip side of that is, is that what you want? Do you want to bring in a guy, or do you want to bring in a guy with a fresh start?
Right. And so let's get to the other candidate, Patrick Graham. I remember him from my days in New England. He certainly did a tremendous job with the linebackers and the defensive line. Yeah. Two areas, certainly the defensive line needs to be addressed, I think, this offseason, and how the Bengals can get more out of the defensive line. Not just only, I think, on the pressure in terms of pressure from the edges in helping out Trey Hendrickson, but in the middle of the defensive line, you have young players in Chris Jenkins and certainly McKinley Jackson. You have two players there that could be big-time pieces of the Bengals defense going forward, but they need to be, I think, coached up. They need to be worked with. They need to be molded into something that can be a force in the middle of that defensive line, along with the free agents you might bring in, along with draft picks that you might bring in. And I like Patrick Graham's experience in working with guys like Vince Wilfork in New England. I think that's a big, big deal, no pun intended. And then when you take a look at Patrick Graham and his work as a linebackers coach with guys like Gerard Mayo, like Dante Hightower, there's a lot to like about what he could bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, Trags, you know Graham inside and out, and you're a better source there than I am. I think if those are indeed the two guys, I think Zach's on a pretty good track there. I'm not sure he's going to make a mistake there. I think big thing is I think Zach knows what he wants, and I think this guy, he 6 years into this thing, I don't think you can underestimate how much he's absorbed and how much he's taken in of past hiring cycles, and so I think he knows. I think this has been a pretty smooth. I think this has been a pretty smooth thing. I think Zach knows what he had in mind, and he acted right away. So it would tell me that he's been, thinking on it even before the season ended. So,
do you think, Geoff? Do you think that the Bengals need defensively to focus more on getting pressure on the opposing quarterback, or doing a better job getting off the field on third down, or making it third and long and doing a better job stopping the run? Is there something that stands out to you that needs to be a priority of the next DC?
Yeah, it's got to be stopping the run, Trags. I mean, and Zach said this. I give him credit. He said this when he made the move with Lou. He said, I'm focusing on somebody in the division. And I think he was saying I think he was telling us he knows what his record in the division is. It's 13-23. And I think he knows in order to win in this thing, you have to stop the run. And it's something, even when they won, I mean, to Lou's credit, his defense has played best in the biggest games, but if you take a look at his 6-year run, the run was always kind of a sticking point. And that's not just the scheme. That's also the people you're putting in there. So, but I think, to me, if you're gonna win the division, you got to stop the run consistently. That, and I think they're okay getting to third and long and stopping third and long. So the season probably died on a 4th and 15. This season's probably different if they could have figured out how to get off on a 4th and 15. And how many 3rd and 8s did they have against the Commanders and Jaden Daniels? So to me, you got to figure that out, because I think they're okay getting to 3rd and long, but how do you get off the field there? And that's where you come into pass rush. Do you blitz more? I mean, that's probably, I don't know. I mean, that would probably be if hindsight is 20/20, yeah, you probably would have blitzed a little bit more during this season. But that's and I think they did in the last 5 games. I think think they were a little bit more liberal with their pressure. But, I think these are all things that got to be hammered out. But there's no question. I think Zach gave a hint at his end of season press conference when he said he's looking for somebody who knows the division, and that division means stopping a run.
What about a switch maybe to a 3-4? I mean, there's been so much focus, and for good reason, on Lou's preference to go with a 4-3 type of alignment, or even a 4-2-5 with the base nickel being the defense that Lou used quite a bit when you have a nickel back like Mike Hilton. But what about the possibility of going to a 3-4?
Well, I think anything's on the table, but I think Lou had the right idea. I think what Lou really had was a hybrid, right? He could flip 3-4, 4-3, and I think you have to because of the different opponents you're facing, and from game to game, the different situations.
Right.
Maybe on third and long, you go to a 4-3 instead of a 3-4. Maybe that's the answer. A lot of it depends on your roster, and a lot of it depends on how the new DC sees that roster. But I kind of like it's, this, Trags, when you switch defenses, that takes and I don't know, I guess what would you call? I mean, Lou's a 4-3, right? But it's a hybrid, right? I mean, it's a hybrid. He's got, those edge guys, are big enough. Sometimes they move inside, but I think that it's tough when you tear up a defense. Then you're in the hole a year or two because you don't have the people. You got to go get the people if you're going to switch. I remember Marvin always toyed with going with a 3-4, and it was something that, people were hesitant to do that because, boom, then you take yourself out of the mix for 2 years because you do not have, it's fine to do that if you have personnel already on the roster and you can build, I remember he thought if he could get Manny Lawson in the draft, that was going to be that he'd be the 3-4. Well, they didn't get Manny Lawson, and so they stayed 4-3, but that was going to be a long, plus Zimmer, they ended up getting Zimmer, who was a 4-3 guy. So, a lot of it is a mesh of roster and who the DC is. But I think Lou had the right idea, though, about being very adaptable.
Speaking with Geoff Hobson of Bengals.com, does a tremendous job covering all things NFL as it relates to the Cincinnati Bengals. You have a busy couple of weeks coming up in the next couple of weeks. You'll be a very busy man. I want to get to that in just a few moments. But you also, Butch, have a story up on Bengals.com. Orlando Brown Jr. gets a leg up on Bengals offseason while endorsing new O-line coach Scott Peters' mindset. What was behind Orlando Brown Jr. Giving his seal of approval to the new offensive line coach / run game coordinator, perhaps, Scott Peters?
Yeah, I think it was, first of all, it was good to see Orlando in the building because it was just 2 weeks ago we saw him limp off the field in Pittsburgh. That's a guy that, let's face it, Trags, he played hurt.
One of the toughest Bengals there is, no question.
Yeah, no question. And there he was. It was, this week he could be, the coaches are on vacation. The players are long gone. But I think Orlando wants to replicate what he did last year when arguably, he feels like, and most people around who you talk to think he was having his best year before he got hurt. He pointed to Joey Boze and his staff, the Bengals strength and conditioning staff. He stayed here and felt like that was a big key in to getting off to a great start. And I think, it's great to see him in there. He's lifting with his upper body because what I think he tell you guys after the Denver game, right, that he was playing with two fractures in his
correct.
Two fractures in his leg. But he says it's getting better. Obviously, he's in there, but he's doing mainly upper body work. But, he says that the leg feels much better. So he just doesn't, it was just great to see him. It was kind of always comforting to see him. He's ready to go. He wants to do it again. He's already thinking about getting back, and we're not even to the AFC Championship game. It's funny, Scott Peters, he actually met when he was in his last year at Oklahoma. Peters was on the circuit, the offensive line circuit, kind of teaching his hands technique, and Orlando was impressed with him back then. And so he actually used some of the things that he picked up from him. It was a brief clinic out in Norman, and he's pretty impressed with him. He's he loves Pollock. I mean, I think he feels like Frank really helped his career.
I think everybody did, really.
Yeah.
I think everybody loved the energy that Frank brought. And sometimes you need a new voice, and it's just as simple as that. And what is that new voice that you think Butch Scott Peters brings to the Bengals?
I think Scott, I think Orlando, said it pretty well that he's got he's probably got a different style than Frank, maybe. I mean, it's not going to be much different than what, because Frank was a hands guy too. Frank evolved with the times. It just might be a different approach. It might be a little bit more of an emphasis on the striking style. But I think Orlando likes the kind of that mindset of a guy who has been a UFC trainer. He's a mixed martial arts guy. He walked in and he was, as Orlando said, he was swole. He eats weights, Orlando said. So that was kind of interesting. So I think, and Orlando was looking for the line. He was a little bit philosophical, talking about what he thinks, his line has to do in the offseason. And he thinks this line's got to bring more energy to the thing. I think he thinks he's an AFC North guy. He realizes the offensive line and the defensive line are the boiler rooms of division contenders. He thinks his guys can take that on. And I think, you got a guy who trained who trained Brock Lesnar and knows how to mix it up. And I think Peters was a 2-time world champion jiu-jitsu champion, so jiu-jitsu champion. And so, I think anytime you can use any edge you can get when you go into the AFC North.
Well, he is 46, Butch, 46, and comes to the Bengals from where else? New England, where he spent the 2024 season as the Patriots offensive line coach. He previously served, of course, I think more Bengal fans are familiar with Scott Peters from his time in Cleveland as the offensive line coach from 2020 through 2023. That would be 4 seasons. What Zach Taylor said is Scott is a great fit for our offense. He's passionate about the position and has done a great job of both developing young players and helping veteran players continue to grow. He's familiar with the AFC North, Butch, as you just mentioned, and knows what it takes to win in our division. I'm excited to have him on our staff. So the Bengals are getting somebody from the AFC who's very familiar with what it takes not only to win in the division, but in the conference.
Yeah, I think, again, to Zach's credit, looking at the North, he went and got a guy who's been in the division for 4 years, and they were Cleveland was successful running the ball in this, the last 4 years. Bill Callahan, he was the assistant to Bill Callahan, who was known well by, the Bengals because his son Brian was here for so long as a coordinator. But Bill Callahan, one of the great offensive line minds, and, they didn't finish, they never finished lower than 12th in NFL rushing when those two guys were in Cleveland. And I think also, too, is, Scott's a Jim McNally disciple as well. The great, as Bengal fans know, the great offensive line guru of their first 2 Super Bowl teams. And he was later on a consultant early on here in the Burrow era. But he and Scott, Scott Peters played for Jim McNally in 2000 with the 2003 Giants. They've kept the relationship together. The one thing, and this Trags as well as anyone, growing up here and living and dying with his team, Jim McNally was known for building great offensive lines with guys like you and me. Yes, there was Munoz, but there was his lines, one of the greatest lines of all time, that 88 Super Bowl team line. 7th round picks, 8th round picks, 9th round picks.
Incredibly athletic as well.
Yes, and I think, and Scott says he kind of sees him. he wants to be like that as a guy who can develop late round picks and back of the roster guys. I think the Bengals feel like, that really hasn't happened for them, in certain spots. And I think that's another thing that attracted Peters to Zach is their ability, because they're playing with some people up there, the Browns, Posick, their Jerron Christian was from 2 years ago, was like the fourth tackle, helped them get into the playoffs. So I think that's the kind of stuff that appealed to Zach.
In talking, Butch, with the guys back in New England, I would say this about Scott Peters and Michael McCarthy, both of whom served last season on the Patriots staff. They didn't have a lot to work with. So they had to get really creative with the personnel. They had tons of injuries. One of the big reasons the Patriots finished with just 4 wins for a second straight year in Foxborough. But what those folks up in New England tell me is he really endeared himself to a lot of the younger players, and he developed trust with those players. Now, were the results there? They weren't great.
Right.
Obviously, Drake May, the rookie quarterback, number 3 overall, spent a lot of his time running for his life, and we know how that can be for a rookie. Any NFL team with a rookie quarterback knows how that can be. But from what I was told, the people in New England said that Scott Peters did absolutely the best, the most he could do with the talent that he had.
Yeah, just from looking at the stories there, he seemed to escape the heat. The heat was going to, the OC and to the receivers coach, and so the offensive line seemed to have kind of were keeping things together a little bit.
Well, I mean, I know this. The Patriots had, I think, by middle of the season, they had one projected starter, Michael Owenu, I believe it was, on their offensive line, and that was it. Everybody else was either injured or unavailable, or had been cut and been moved by the team and released by the team. So it was a very challenging time for a guy like Scott Peters. And sometimes I think when an offensive line coach or any coach goes through a period like that where they are tested and they have to get creative, sometimes you come to a situation where it's certainly more stable in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. You have more veterans established at their position. I think that can benefit the Bengals, and I think that can benefit Peters.
Yeah, I mean, I think what helps him too maybe is his is not a conventional career. He played in the league, and then he ended up, opening a gym and getting into jiu-jitsu and competing, and then he get into training the UCF guys, and so it's and trying to relate that. He related the jiu-jitsu stuff and some of the mixed martial arts stuff to offensive line play, and so he's had a kind of he ran his own gym, So I think he's kind of had an uncharacteristic rise, and I think that helps guys. I think that helps them think outside the box, and I think that helped. It probably helped him in New England, and I think it will help him in here, where he'll think he'll walk into Canton with I already talked to him about Orlando and Mims. He's those are two guys. Like he said, you just don't find guys like that. They just don't exist. He's got 2 of them as bookends, and of course, I think we just assumed that Teddy Karras, he's the glue in there at center, So you get your glue at center, you get your bookends, and where they go at guard is probably the biggest thing that will face Scott.
Yes. All right, let's move on to not Pro Bowl, but the All-Pro announcements that came out this week. 2 Bengals, no surprise here. Jamar Chase had the best season of any NFL receiver, and he clearly is an All-Pro, first team, no question about it, Triple Crown winner, first Bengal to do it, and it hadn't been done since, Cooper Kupp a couple of years ago, but it was only, I believe, the 5th time in the Super Bowl era that an NFL receiver won the receiving Triple Crown, which is receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and receptions. So no surprise there. Trey Hendrickson also accomplished a first in Bengal history, becoming the first player officially to lead the league in sacks. Of course, there was Coy Bacon's 1976 year of 22 sacks or 21 and a half sacks, whatever it was. But that back then in 76, it was not an official stat. But anyway, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson, your thoughts on those two deservedly becoming all pros?
Yeah, I mean, it was an honor to watch both those. You know how it's we can get cynical in this job.
Yes, we can.
but it is. It's guys like Jamar and Hendrickson, when they have years like that, you remind you it's the best job in the world. It beats working when you get paid to watch guys like that and report guys like that. I mean, they were just terrific. And when the thing was, Trags, when they needed them the most, when the team needed them, they came through. If you look at their numbers in the games that they had to have, they were at their best. There were a lot of games they had to have after starting 0-3, and it's particularly in December. And those guys, I think Jamar I think he continued. And if you just take away if you just look at the month of December and January, if you look at the last 5 games, he still led the league. And Trey still led the league, and Trey still led the league, I believe, in sacks and right there in quarterback hits. And so, like I say, that's the thing. When they needed him, it's not like they racked up their numbers in games that didn't matter. You know what I mean? Of course, they all matter, especially this year. We found that out. But you know what I mean? They didn't shrink in December.
What about, Joe Burrow in the year of Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen? And, of course, they had their epic duel on Sunday in Orchard Park. Joe Burrow was the odd man out in terms of the all-pro consideration with Lamar first and Josh Allen second. But your thoughts on the season Joe Burrow had in terms of greatest Bengal quarterbacking seasons in history?
I mean, I think it is. The only one.
It's remarkable when you talk about the 81 MVP in Kenny Anderson, the 88 MVP in Boomer Esiason. Both of them, of course, led their teams to the Super Bowl. Even Joe Burrow's 2022 season. Forget about his 2021 Super Bowl run. His 2022 season was incredible. But to say that this is the greatest quarterback season in Bengal history, to me, is saying something.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it's saying something about Burrow that the only one close is probably his 2022 season. I mean, but you get it. Boomer was great because of his yards per attempt, and Kenny Anderson. People forget that was the first 70% passing season.
I did not know that.
It was the only 70% passing season since World War II and Drew Brees in 2009. So that was in 1982. And that is but Burrow went 70%. He threw what, Trags? 43 touchdown passes?
I think it's 43, yeah.
Yeah. Led the league in receiving. Led the league in reception yards. He set an NFL record with a streak of 3 touchdowns and 250 yards. I mean, to me, the big thing, though, is that accuracy. Just going back to the accuracy. He's the only guy. There's only 2 guys in history who have had multiple 70% completion seasons. His idol, Drew Brees, and Joe Burrow. And
his numbers, not to interrupt you, Butch.
Yeah.
460 for 652, 49-18, 4,918 yards passing, 70.6% completion ratio. Percentage, I should say, as you mentioned. 7.54 yards per attempt, the 43 touchdowns, only 9 interceptions, and his quarterback rating of 108.5.
Yeah, I mean, it was, to me, the stunning thing is he didn't win the passing title. That's how great Lamar was. Lamar almost broke the record for passing title, almost broke Rodgers' record for passing title, which I think is 122.5 or something. But, to have a 108, and I think Joe was either second or third, which is that's some quarterbacking going on, man, in the AFC. I mean, it wasn't too long ago. A 108 would have won it going away. So this guy, I mean, we're watching. Like I say, man. I mean, greatest season I ever saw. I mean, I don't know what it was like to cover Unitas or Namath, but I got a pretty good idea.
Well, and you know what, Butch? Coming off the wrist surgery that he had, that no quarterback had ever come back from or had experience going into an NFL season, throw that on top of it. I mean, when you consider the context of what Joe Burrow did this year, he's clearly the NFL comeback player of the year. He'll win that for a second time in his career. Not exactly what you want to have to win, but he's going to win it. He won it, obviously, in 2021. He's going to win it this year. It's remarkable to me when you take the full context of what he was able to achieve based on what he was coming back from in 2023.
Yeah, I remember like when I want to say December 1st, when it got really cold, he still didn't know how it was going to respond.
Right, against Pittsburgh. Yep.
I mean, and geez, he only had one of the greatest Decembers of all time. So I guess he answered that. I guess the wrist answered that. I mean, this guy. I mean, it's when he. I mean, it's amazing. And the thing it's amazing is, he's completing 70% of his passes, and he's averaging. I mean, damn near 50 passes a game.
Yes.
That's the amazing thing. I can see if a guy, I would say, a guy completed 70% of his passes, he must be throwing 28 passes a game. No. I mean, he's far and away broke the Bengals record for pass attempts.
That's just remarkable. It's one of the greatest seasons, and it was said many times during the season. It's been said many times since the end of the year on January 4th in Pittsburgh. It's unfortunate that kind of season gets wasted in a non-playoff year, but that's the way it is. That's the way the cookie crumbles. What are you going to be busy with in the next couple of weeks? I mentioned earlier you're going to Mobile for the Senior Bowl and get ready to scout that week down in Mobile, Alabama, and then you're heading to New Orleans.
Yeah, I'll get a little trip to the another Senior Bowl. Last year I went looking for big guys because there were a lot of tackles there, offensive tackles. I guess I'm going to keep looking at big guys. This time I'll be looking on the other side of the ball, I guess, I would assume. The thing I want to ask the scouts before I head down there is, how does the transfer portal and the NLI stuff affect them? Because there are guys just moving all over the place, and to the point now where colleges are hiring GMs. I wonder how that affects these, So that's something I kind of want to look at when I'm down there. And then, but I remember last year went down to the Senior Bowl, and kind of the hot story there was a guy named Hunt coming out of a very small school. I want to say Houston Christian. Very small school.
Yes.
Right? And his whole family was down there, and he was kind of a long shot. And this guy's still in the playoffs, playing for the Eagles, playing some very, very valuable snaps. So you never know when you go down there what you might see, and then what you might see a year later. Which I that's interesting. A year ago, I remember talking to his dad about how the whole family had gone down to Mobile, and that was a big thing to get an invite for that small school in Texas. And now they're going to the NFC Championship game. That family, that's something. And then after that, it's a short bolt over to New Orleans from Mobile, and hopefully at that Thursday night awards ceremony. Not only, I guess, do we hope to see Burrow get comeback player, I'd love to see Jamar give Barkley a run for offensive player of the year. And I'd love to see get Hendrickson what he deserved. I mean, to me, if Hendrickson doesn't get defensive player of the year, I'm not sure. So I'd love to go up there, and it might be like one of those great Academy Award nights. One flew over the cuckoo's nest, right, where everybody swept. So maybe the Bengals could sweep.
By the way, you just mentioned my favorite movie of all time. When people ask me, what are your favorite movies of all time? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Goodfellas. I kind of go back and forth between those two, But One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from 1975 is still, to me, a staple. It's one of those movies, Butch. Whenever it comes on the screen, on any of those late night channels, you know, you're trying to fall asleep, I will watch it. I won't change the channel. Goodfellas is the same way. Do you have a movie like that?
Trags, if I'm not mistaken, Robert Parrish got his nickname from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes, he did.
Because of the Chief, right? The way the Chief played basketball, the way the Chief went up and down the floor, and somebody started to call him Parrish Chief, and the name stuck.
I love that.
Yeah. I guess my movie, I don't know, Trags. I guess it's probably The Natural or Field of Dreams, I guess.
So you're a baseball guy. You're a romanticist for baseball. I know that, Butch. And you're also a glutton for punishment in baseball, given the team, the Carmine Hose that you root for. And
That's right.
Nobody. I think I've asked you this before. I bet I am the only one that ever calls the Red Sox the Carmine Hose.
No, it's great. I mean, it's like it's like reading Larry Claflin in the Record American from
I love this.
From 40 years ago. You know,
for everybody.
There was a great. Did you see when they announced Vrabel?
Yes,
as the head coach in New England.
I did,
and Dan Roach was the first guy he called on. Hey, buddy, right, to Roachy. And Shaughnessy just killed Roachy the next day in the paper. He just killed him.
You know who else got a great shout-out from Mike Vrabel, and I know you know this, Karen Guregian of the Boston Herald.
Right.
And I thought that was really classy. I talked to Karen about it, and she was very honored, very flattered. And you know Karen Guregian with the Boston Herald. One of the most sincere, humble, gracious people you'll ever meet on the football beat.
Tremendous lady. Tremendous. She's done it all there. Hockey. Tells a great story where
Harry Sinden, baby.
Bobby Orr leaned up at hello, Karen. Thank you. She had written a story or something, and there's Bobby Orr leaning over into the press box. She's got some great stories. And I tell that because I love Roachy and I love Shaughnessy. So, I mean, it's just, but you know, the dynamics down there, you know, and it's, I know they were pretty happy in New England to get Vrabel.
Yeah. And I told people this all along. He was the guy for that job. I know what happened with Gerard Mayo was unfortunate. Yeah. I'm glad that Robert Kraft stepped forward and said, we put him in a bad position this past year, but he acknowledged that and said, you know, we put him in a bad position, but I have to do, and Jonathan have to do what's best for the Patriots. And I think they did that, and I think they got the best possible fit. A guy that understands the culture, a guy that won't take any gruff there. And I don't want to say it's his way or the highway, but he's going to have primary say in the organization. Unlike Gerard Mayo, where I think it was collective. And that's where I think Zach excels. Zach is in a situation where it is a collective inside the Bengals org. And correct me if I'm wrong, Butch, but that's the way the Bengals have always operated. And they hire a coach that understands that concept and can work well within that concept.
Yeah, I think it's all, you know, I mean, even when Sam Weiss was running the offense, it was collaborative. You know, I mean, it was even, you know, the front office was collaborative and it was, you know, but I think that's also too, you know, the team was founded by a coach. So I think the coach is always and that's the great thing about Mike Brown. I mean, he kept that coaching, you know, he saw how his father ran it, and he knows that a head football coach is sacred in Mike's eyes, you know, and I think that's how he runs the organization. I think I think he feels like it can't be one way or it can't be one way or the highway. Now somebody has to make the final decision, but it has to be you know, Marvin Lewis and Mike Brown talked every day, you know, when he was and you know, there were a lot of things decided that probably either guy didn't agree with, but they were clearly on, you know, talking everything through. And I don't think Zach and Mike talk every day, but I think it's every week probably.
Yeah,
and
he said that at the end of the season in his postseason wrap up. He acknowledged the fact that, this isn't a situation where I go in with Mike Brown and wrap up. How do you think the season went? Yeah. He's been talking to Mike Brown and Katie and Troy throughout and Duke throughout the whole season. So it's just a continuation, an evolution, if you will, of how they see the team from week to week during the season and in the postseason.
I mean, just compare that to Dallas, where Jerry Jones meets the press after every game.
I can't imagine being a head coach in that environment, but I guess you sign on the dotted line there, and you know what you're getting into. Before I let you go, Butch, I know a big moment is coming up. The annual Pro Football Hall of Fame vote takes place Super Bowl week, right? It always has.
Yeah, it's the final 15. They announced that the same day. It's the awards night, Thursday night, the same night that the current awards for the current players get announced. They also announced the Hall of Fame class now, and so Willie Anderson for the fourth straight year is in the final 15. So that would be a great topper. If he could, come out there on the stage, that would be great. But we'll see what happens. This is his fourth trip to the finals, so we'll see how it comes down.
It would be great to get him a yellow jacket to add to the orange one that he already has.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and it's interesting to you listen to Scott Peters talk about hand technique and everything like that. And Willie was a pioneer when it came to hand technique in the when he was playing. He was like the first guy. He kind of popularized what they called independent hands, high hand, low hand technique. To it was no longer bull rushing. These guys were fast and they were getting around a corner. And Willie adjusted his mechanics and his technique. Very, very savvy guy. I don't think people understand that. They know what a great player he was, but this guy has a massively brilliant football mind. He's a savant. He has an offensive line academy, but he was right there with high hand, low hand, and I think we'll see Anthony and Willie and Jim McNally and Scott Peters up here at some point having Amarius Mims and Orlando Brown, high hand, low hand. I think there's going to be a kind of a mini offensive line convention here.
What is the status with Jim McNally right now?
Jim McNally, former consultant. He's no longer a consultant, but he's still actively involved on X. He's very involved on X. He's still very involved in offensive line philosophy and offensive line play. When Peters got announced, he was all over X, and so he's basically he's retired, but he just got recognized by the Hall of Fame, the Award of Excellence. They name 3 assistant coaches every year to win the Awards of Excellence, and he was one of them, which is a great honor. And the Bengals have a lot of former assistants that could be in line for that. A guy like Jim Anderson, I think of. So it's Jim's still I think Jim's 81 now, but he's still really active in the profession. So it wouldn't surprise me to see like I say, Jim McNally had what they used to call the Mushroom Society. He founded it. It was an offensive line clinic. They called it the Mushroom Society because they said like the offensive line is like mushrooms. Nobody they work in darkness and people feed them stuff. But that was called the Mushroom Clinic or the Cool Clinic, which was organization of offensive coaching and organization of offensive line, and that was based here in Cincinnati. Pretty much a national convention for offensive line play that Jim started. And Scott Peters, after his playing career and before his coaching career, he would come to that and he actually would present his hands technique and stuff like that. So he's no stranger to Cincinnati and Anthony Munoz tape and Willie Anderson tape. So it's kind of a nice connection.
Outstanding. So when do you leave for Mobile?
Well, probably probably some point at the end of this week. And we got the 2 Fenway Express will be taking to the highways. So the highways and byways. I always like to drive the Mobile. Trags.
You do.
So I always.
You don't fly. You
the
drive.
The only time I fly is when they're coaching. Is when the Bengals are coaching it. And but I even think I drove in 2020. And that you were down there in 2020 for that Senior Bowl, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I was not. I did not travel for that.
Okay.
I was in transition between New England and Cincinnati.
Okay.
That year. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So
Okay.
you learn something new every day.
Yeah, that was the Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert Senior Bowl that they coached.
Yes. Well, I'm going to let you go, Butch.
Thanks, Trags. Always a pleasure.
Hey, you can catch Geoff Hobson spelled the old English way on the X. That would be Geoff, GeoffHobsoncin, correct?
Yes, sir. You've got it.
All right. That's where you can follow his work on the X. But, of course, you can follow him and should be reading all of his great content leading up to this week's championship games, as well as the potential forthcoming defensive coordinator hire of the Cincinnati Bengals. That is in the offing. That's all on Bengals.com. He's Geoff Hobson of Bengals.com. My name is Mike Petralia, Trags. Thanks for watching this episode of the Jungle War podcast, brought to you by CLNS Media and the Game Time app.